Morning, church. As you can see, the scripture reading is taken from Daniel 1, verse 1 to 7. In the year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel, and some of the king's descendants, and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them the chiefs of the eunuch gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, and to Mishael, Meshach, and Azariah, Abednego. This is the end of the reading. May the church say? Amen.
I kind of have the feeling when Dane saw that one, he was like, oh, Matt, thanks. But I do love history, and I do love Daniel in particular. It is my favorite book of the Bible, as I think many of you know, along with Acts, for its historical context. But today, I want to talk about Daniel, the book itself, and it's more of an overview of it. It is an incredibly important book, particularly for Christians. It is Daniel and Ezekiel are what I would call the keys to the book of Revelation. In the book of Revelation, no book is referenced more than the book of Daniel. It is the number one. Now, often scholars will say that the more important references and the second most are from the book of Ezekiel, who was a contemporary of Daniel. But that too shows how much that Daniel and Ezekiel, again, Daniel we're going to focus on today, was important to understanding one of the more controversial and much debated books in the entire Bible. The book of Daniel should really be more called the Revelations of Daniel. Revelation meaning imparting knowledge, or I'm trying to remember what the definition of being given foreknowledge and understanding. And that is predominantly what Daniel is about. Now, it's not just about that. There's a few parts to the book of Daniel. And it's funny, I love the song that Clinton had picked, let my enemies not triumph over me. That is something that Daniel endured quite a bit of, is enemies trying to triumph over him. However, it is funny, because Daniel is not actually a well-defined character, if you will. Like, honestly, you read the book of Daniel, he's almost not in it at times. Daniel, in fact, in the first 6 books of Daniel, he refers to himself in the third person. He doesn't even put himself in the third person. It's an interesting little tidbit to the mentality and what Daniel is trying to get at. Because the book of Daniel has maybe about 3 parts. It's his life, the life of his friends, and the majority of it, the prophecies or visions that he interprets or deals with. The book is defined by the events at the very beginning in verses 1 and 2, and what happened before. In Daniel chapter 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The eradication of the state of Judah. Israel had already been destroyed, but now too, Judah was gone. It was eradicated by God through the Babylonians for what they've done. The Babylonians were a Semitic people, actually like the Jews. But that doesn't mean they had the same worldview. The Jews are a very weird people back in the day in particular. Much more common now because Christianity, Islam, Zoroastrianism all believe in monotheism. Zoroastrianism does believe in a monotheistic. If you've never heard of it, it was the religion of the Persians. There you go. So I see a few people going like, "What did he just say?" So monotheism is well known nowadays. We are monotheists. But in the day, there was basically only one. It was the Jews. Everyone else was pagans. And the Babylonians in particular were very, very devout pagans. They loved their city king of Marduk. Probably one you've heard before. So Daniel and the other exiles of Judah are sent into this world that seems at times a little similar, like the languages are close. This is why we call them Semitic. It's actually not about the blood or anything, it's about the language. The Semitic languages of Aramaic, Babylonian, Akkadian, Aramaic is, I'm trying to think of all the ones, Hebrew, all of them of the same language family. And that's what makes them Semitic peoples. And so he can understand the religion a little bit, but it's different. It's like hearing English to Dutch, probably. Dutch is the same foundations as English, and there's a lot of common words, but it's still a very different language. So it's a different world for him, and one that he's going from a monotheism to a devout paganism, and a devout belief in this Marduk god, who is not always the most friendly god. It is also interesting, the book of Daniel, and Daniel, I believe personally that Daniel did write this book. It's interesting to me, and I think one of those things that maybe proves it is because Daniel is actually the only book that has so much of another language in it. Now you have a little bit of another language, Aramaic, in Ezra and a single verse in Jeremiah. But Daniel, it's half the book. From about, I believe it's somewhere in chapter 2 to about half of chapter 7 are all in another language. That's our oldest manuscripts, are all in another language. It's in Aramaic, it's no longer in Hebrew. And then it switches back to Hebrew. That's because personally, my personal idea is because he wrote it in both languages, the entire thing. Because as we see here at the very beginning of Daniel chapter 1, is he is picked out for being an intelligent human being, good-looking, intelligent, as someone who can be taught the language and taught things, because he's going to become an advisor to the king. Now, it's important to understand a few things as well in the context of that. So, number one, Daniel is of noble birth. Now, he's not royalty, but he is noble. That means he comes from a rich family. I don't know how that family was rich or why they're nobles, but they were. Maybe they had led armies or were commanders. At the very least, they were definitely rich, because that's almost exclusively what it took back in the day to be nobility. So he is going from the lap of luxury of Judea to essentially the New York City of its day, the biggest, most powerful city in the world. He's going to a small kingdom to the most powerful kingdom in the entire world at its apex. And he's going as a hostage. He's going what should be what would be more honest to say as a slave. Now he's going to have a lot of latitude, as we see, but he is a slave in effect. If he doesn't do his job, he's going to get killed. Now, the added bonus with the hostage part is that if the Jewish king doesn't behave, Daniel also dies. So there's someone else who's got his fate in his hands a bit. But Jehoiakim never does, and the Jews back in Jerusalem are so thoroughly destroyed that they are never really able to make a concerted effort to fight the Babylonians. So it's not a worry that he has. But Daniel is a hostage in Babylon, a slave practically in Babylon. Now, when I think of individuals like that, I think of people who are probably not going to be rocking the boat too much. But Daniel's a very, very special kind of guy. He is a very stalwart man. He stands firm on his Jewish beliefs, on his principles, on that God is with him even in exile. Daniel, as we'll see later on, as you find later on in I believe it's chapter 9, Daniel even believes that the Jews earned their exile. He knows they earned their exile. He knows they deserved what they got. He begs God to, fulfill his end of the promise and end it, but he absolutely believes that they had earned that. They had fallen away from God. And he was dealing with the consequences of that. He was an honorable man. But he was a man who stood firm with God. As we see in chapter 1, the very first instance of Daniel is that in verse 8, Daniel makes up his mind that he would not defile himself. So you have, it's funny, my father brought up fine dining for our communion today. Well, that's what Daniel was offered every single day, is fine dining. He's getting the king's own place. The king, the most powerful human being in the world, is not eating porridge unless he likes it. He's not eating slop. He's not eating bad food. He's not eating the rotten stuff. He's eating the choice meats, the nice stuff. It is prime rib every day kind of a thing. He is eating nice. And he's giving that over to these people because he wants them to be healthy. He wants them to be smart. He wants them to be trained because they're about to become his advisors. But I'm guessing that means probably a lot of pork, or at the very least, cattle that are not properly slaughtered in the Jewish way. And so they are untouchable for the Jews. Now it's funny, most Jews apparently go, whatever, we don't care, we're not here to rock the boat, we don't want to die. Because only him and his 4 friends, only Daniel and his 4 friends are found to be like them. It says later in chapter 1, they are different, they are set apart. Only these 5 men show this stalwartness that, no, we don't care if it's the nicest food in the world. We ain't eating it because it's not our way. And Daniel makes a deal with Aspenza, the leader of the eunuchs, that he will not defile himself. And he says, hey, as we see in chapter 1, that he would give us, please, in verse 12, please test your servants for 10 days and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. Now, I don't know about you, but if I had the choice between a porterhouse and a bunch of steamed vegetables, I'm taking the porterhouse. Now, my son might take the vegetables because he loves his veggies, but most people would take the nice choice meats. But he says, and not even the wine. He even rejects the wine, the nice drinks. He says, just give me the water. Vegetables and water, and give me 10 days. And so the chief of the eunuchs says, okay, you know what? Let's see. Curiosity. What's to him, if it doesn't work out, what to him is 5 more dead Jews? No offense or anything. They've already massacred a whole bunch while taking Judah and taking Jerusalem. He probably doesn't care too much. And he's maybe a little curious. So he accepts the deal. And because Daniel stands firm with God, God stands firm with Daniel. And what happens? At the end of those 10 days, him and his friends are fatter. They look healthier. That's what it means, is they look healthier than everybody else. And so he doesn't give them the food that would, in the Jewish tradition, desecrate their body. It would be an unworthy tabernacle, as we were talking about this morning. And God is with him because he stands so fervently with his beliefs. It's rather incredible that Daniel is able and willing against a king who can do unspeakable evils to him with a single word. You know, the power that Nebuchadnezzar has as the most powerful human being on the planet is insane. And there is no courts. There is no second chances usually. A guy like that, it is one and done. But even right from the very beginning, Daniel's willing and able to stand up and say, no matter what, I ain't doing it. Most other Jews, as we can infer from the chapter, most human beings would say, no problem, I'll eat your nice meat, sure, cool. But Daniel says, that is not what a Jew is to do. I refuse. Go kill me if you need to. Now, Daniel is, of course, also a prophet. Now, that's just the beginning of his life, essentially, in Babylon. He will spend the vast majority of his life in Babylon. Daniel was only from 12 to 17 years old when he goes into exile. He was a young man. Most historians think he was actually even on the younger side, too, like 12. Because in order to go into that program of the eunuchs, you had to be young. Because they wanted to get you young. That's why we have school when you're young and not when you're, in your 50s, typically. Although you can go to school in your 50s, don't worry about it. But they are young. And even from that young age, he's able to stand up and say, no, I know what I've been taught. I know what the Torah says, what God wills for me, and I will not defile myself. And in that, he becomes, I would say, probably the prophet that he was always meant to be. It's funny we call him a prophet because he is very, very unlike all the other prophets, particularly his contemporary Ezekiel. Ezekiel is a very interesting case that I would like to get to in another sermon, but Ezekiel is as flamboyant as you can possibly get. He literally eats a scroll one time. He is flamboyant. The point of doing these crazy things that Ezekiel does is to get a point, to get a reaction, to make it memorable to people as he prophesies to the Jews and to the Babylonians about what is to come for them, just like Daniel will. But Daniel doesn't do that stuff. He doesn't even say like Isaiah or Jeremiah does, "Thus saith the Lord." Not once do you find that. Daniel doesn't say that. Daniel doesn't do that. Daniel is, the best way I think to put it is, Daniel is the humble wise man in the corner who talks when he needs to. That's probably the best way of putting it. And that's why it is, I think, so interesting what Ezekiel says about Daniel. Ezekiel in chapter, interesting to double check, yes, chapter 14 and in verse 14. And then again later in 20, Ezekiel and God are talking about how, destruction will come. In verse 13, Son of man, if a country sins against me by committing unfaithfulness, I will stretch out my hand against it and destroy its supply of bread, send famine against it, and cut it off from it both man and beast. Even though these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in its midst by their own righteousness, they could only deliver themselves, declares the Lord God. Now, I'm not going to get into why Ezekiel was talking about that. It is more the company that Ezekiel puts Daniel in. It is Noah, the one human being on the planet in his day that God says is a righteous man and is a good man, and so saves his family exclusively during the flood. And Job, a man who God says is so faithful that the devil can do whatever he wants, and he knows Job will never turn from him. That is good company. That is good company. And Ezekiel and God because it is inspired word. God inspired Ezekiel to put these words to paper, to say these things. So it is also God who says this. They see Daniel as in the same stature as these great men. The point of that was to say, these three men are so great. God's wrath is so strong, they could only save themselves. But it's still exemplifying how much esteem someone like Ezekiel and God himself had for Daniel. Again, he will even say that he doubles down on it in verse 20 when he says Noah, Daniel, and Job, putting them together. And again, he is a man of incredible dedication to God. But he is not a man who shines in the spotlight. He's almost a background player in his own book most of the time, except for the very few instances in which you have it about him. I mean, almost half the visions and prophecies in the book of Daniel aren't even to Daniel. They're to Nebuchadnezzar or to Belshazzar. So it's not, later on they will be to him, but in a very particular context. So Daniel spends most of his life almost the entirety of his life in Babylon, and sees basically nearly the entire Neo-Babylonian period. Almost all 87 of the 87 years of the Neo-Babylonian period, Daniel sees at least 60 of them, as well as the first few years of the Persian Empire. He lives a very, very long time too. In that time, he sees 40 years at least of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, then of Amil-Marduk, then of Nergal-Sarsar, then Nabonidus and his son Belshazzar, who is of the writing on the wall fame. The first 4 chapters of the book of Daniel deal with Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Chapter 1, again, as we've gone through, is his first few days, is his first little time. I would say first few days even within Babylon. The second chapter is of course the visions of the 4 beasts. The third chapter is not even about Daniel. It's not even about Daniel. It's about the others, his friends, and what they went through. The one, I guess, notable experience they had, if you will. And then finally in chapter 4, the vision of the tree. Now Daniel goes hand in hand with historiography and history. It is a much debated book, because if the prophecies in it are true, then Daniel prophesies the rise of the Romans, Alexander the Great, the Hellenistic period in its wars in Judea, the Roman, the Scipio invasion of Anatolia and their conquest. He predicts so much. Now, I believe these are to be true, but there's a lot of historical debate about these things. And so one I would like to bring up real quick is chapter 4. It's also funny how Daniel is when he deals with these visions and stuff. Chapter 2 it exemplifies in verse 28 how it's I don't know how to interpret these visions, but there is one who does. And that is the attitude Daniel takes. It's like there's a God who does know all things, who can do all things, and this is what he says. Very much I'm just the messenger, dude. I'm just the messenger. But to go back to the history here, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and he's deeply troubled by it, and he brings in Daniel, one of his greatest wise men, to interpret. And it's this. I think many of us know it. Nebuchadnezzar will go insane for 7 years and eat the grass of the field. His fingernails will grow long and his hair will grow long. And then, after 7 years, he will regain his throne. Some would like to say, this didn't happen. Actually, we have no idea if it didn't happen. 30 years of Nebuchadnezzar's reign are completely blank. We don't know what happened. Only the first 10 years And even then, it's more because the conquest of Judah and then a war he had against the Egyptians. I'd like to point out, we don't know the time frame of these first 4 chapters. Later on, we get during the reigns of, but in the first 4 chapters, we actually don't know the time frame. We get ideas of what the time frame might be, but we're not sure. A lot of years probably skips through these. And in Daniel chapter 4, we get this whole idea of Nebuchadnezzar going insane. And again, we don't know 30 years. And it's funny because the Bible describes that his hair will grow like eagle feathers, great and long, and his nails will become like bird's claws. There's actually a thing in medical, I can't remember the name of it, it's actually bugging me at the moment, but if you eat a lot of particular grass, your nails will grow really long and your hair will grow really long. And it's from eating grass. It's a really interesting thing. It's only ever been documented in the modern world, I believe, twice, but it is a real thing. So one way in which we can show the historiography of Daniel. Again, Daniel is such a background character in his own book. It's ridiculous sometimes. But we should also remember that Daniel is a Jew. He's a devout and deep Jew. And why I emphasize this is because the prophecies in which we see from Nebuchadnezzar of the 4 beasts, from later on the visions that he personally gets of conflicts to come in chapter 11, of the ram and the goat in chapter 8, and chapter 7 in the Ancient of Days. It's not really about Christianity for the most part. Now, chapter 7 most likely is, but not about Christianity, but Jesus' authority. Daniel is such an important book. In chapter 7, you get this concept of the Son of Man. I don't know if you guys know this, because I found it very interesting, but do you know how many times Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man? It's 81 times in the first 4 books of the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 81 times Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man, referencing right there in chapter 7. This is how important Daniel was, though. Like, Daniel may be a background character in his own book at times, but he is essential. He is so important that Jesus is constantly referring back to Daniel. And now he refers to huge amounts of the Old Testament. Daniel's by no means the only one. But to have 81 times just this one sentence, this one verse in Daniel is incredible. And that's just one of many other times he refers himself back to Daniel. I love going back to Daniel. We love to think about Balthasar's feast and the writing on the wall. How wonderful, a funny story that is. Almost at times. That's how going into Sunday school. How it was taught to me is almost it was comical, because it is a tiny bit. Honestly, it is a little bit comical. I think actually, honestly, Linda Ross herself was the one who taught it to me back in the day. I think so. I might be wrong on that, but it was a long time ago. But chapter 5, it jumps around 20 years at least. It jumps 20 years and 3 kings all the way to Nabonidus. Nebuchadnezzar has been dead for 20 years, and now it's a new king, Nabonidus. Now, you might be going, Matt, Nabonidus is not once mentioned in the book of Daniel, and that is 100% true. He's not there. But his son Belshazzar is. And again, for the historiography of it, it references Belshazzar as king. Well, Belshazzar wasn't king. He was the son of the king. Nabonidus was never in Babylon. It was actually a big, major conflict between the Babylonians and Nabonidus, is that they were really mad at him because they have this whole New Year's festival that they do where the king had to grasp the hand of Marduk to usher in the new year and to begin the new festivities and the religious calendar and everything. And Nabonidus hadn't done that for 10 years because he's off doing something else. We're actually not 100% sure. He may have been campaigning against the Proto-Arabs, Or he may have even been doing archaeological-like stuff. We're not 100% sure. But he wasn't in Babylon. And so Balthazar had become king in all but name. It's why when the writing on the wall happens and Balthazar is like, I will give whoever can interpret this third in the kingdom. He can only give third in the kingdom because he's already second. His father's first. He's second. He can't give second. That's his job. So he gives third. Just a little tidbit, but I gotta love Daniel when he's brought in. Balthazar has to be reminded that Daniel even exists. Clearly Daniel's kind of fallen out of favor, but is still honored because he's still clearly available. He's not been killed off. He's available. But, the queen tells Balthazar that, hey, there was a man in the kingdom whom, in verse 11 of chapter 5, whom a spirit of the holy gods, and it's lowercase with an S there. So they're even thinking pagan gods give Daniel his power or something. Because again, they're pagans. And the days of your father, referring to Nebuchadnezzar, the great forebear of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, illumination, insight, and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father and the king, appointed him chief of the magicians, conjurers, Chaldeans, and diviners. Again, something I didn't touch on, but Daniel had, as he's gone, accumulated a lot of power. And we'll see him get even more power as the Persians come in. But, clearly he's been downgraded as the chaos of the last 20 years. I mean, I didn't even mention one of the Neo-Babylonian kings because he only reigns for like a year. So there's a lot of chaos. So Daniel's become less of an important figure in this time. But I love, the king, this writing on the wall happens, and the king is like, I will give so much stuff to whoever can interpret this. I will give whatever. Again, third in the kingdom, along with power, money, wealth, everything. Daniel comes in, and in verse 17, we get, again, another little snippet of Daniel's mentality. He already knows what's up. He knows the score. Is that, then Daniel answered and said before the king, keep your gifts for yourself, or give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription to the king and make the interpretation known to him. I think it's funny. I think Daniel in that time was going like, no, we're good here. Because the interpretation is the party's over there, Balthazar. You're done. It's over. Literally, the party's over. He's having a party at that moment. And Daniel comes in to tell him, your kingdom's falling. The Persians are here, essentially. Many tekel and Paris. Your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians. It's like, it's no wonder Daniel said, maybe not just a humble man, but as a wise man to go, I don't want to have any part of this crumbling facade. You're done, and I'm going to go off. Okay? It's just this wonderful little snippet, again, because we actually see so little of Daniel's personality in the book. And as we turn to probably one of the most famous moments in the actually entire Bible, Daniel in the lion's den, in chapter 6. And we see once again his loyalty to God. Daniel has been given a lot of authority and power by the Persians. He is appointed over satraps, who are almost governors in a lot of ways. And he has power over them to help keep coordination. And so a bunch of them don't like this, probably because Daniel's a Jew, and they aspire to kill Daniel with this decree. Now, clearly, Daniel and Darius, who we're actually not sure who he is, it is probably not Cyrus the Persian, because he's referenced at the end as a different person, but a Darius who is a king of most likely Babylon city, or Babylon, the area of Mesopotamia or something. We're not entirely sure who he is, though the historical record back then is still, there's a lot of spots we don't know. It's not an easy thing to just say for certain for 2,500 years ago. But they give up. They make this law that everyone has to worship, and Daniel says, "No, I'm going to go worship my God." Again, showing his loyalty, because the punishment is to be thrown into this den of lions that we'll see can kill people before they even touch the ground. But Daniel still says, nope, not doing it. Like he did, and then by this point, Daniel's in his 70s to 80s. He is an old man. And yet he is still able, like he did when he was either 12 or 15 or 17, whatever that age was in chapter 1, he's still able to go, nope, not doing it, don't care. Go ahead and throw me in the lion's den. I don't care. I know what's right. I know what my God says, and I will do that. Where the vast majority of other human beings would say, okay, you know what, I'll bend this one time. Daniel says, I refuse. Again, I think we can see why Ezekiel held Daniel in such esteem. They throw Daniel, the king is caught in this predicament that clearly the king did not like. Again, we can see that Daniel is also a man who's someone people can get along with, because he's developed a friendship with the king. Because the king is instantly upset that Daniel's caught up in this. He's not happy about it. Clearly we can see that Daniel is not only a wise man who knows his place, if you will, and knows when he needs to give counsel, when he should stand off, and knows that he's maybe not always the main character of the story, if you will, but knows that God is always the main character of the story, as we should ourselves, but also is a man who's able to be friendly enough to that great kings want to be around him and want to care about him. The king, in verse 16, the king has to do it because he's bound by the law just as everyone else. And brought in Daniel and cast him into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, your God whom you constantly serve will himself deliver you. He doesn't want Daniel to do this, but he also has a feeling, the king has a feeling that Daniel, I think it's honestly sometimes more like this, that the king thinks Daniel's God owes him one, He's like, you serve your God so constantly, so consistently that he owes you one, okay? I don't know if that's actually how he felt, but it seems like a high probability to me. That's how at least I would have felt, if I was in his shoes and as someone who didn't believe in Yahweh. I'd be like, come on, your God's got to give you something by now. And what happens? He is given that. Daniel is delivered, so that the king who has a frivolous night, can't sleep, goes first thing in the morning, unseals the tomb, and is happy to find Daniel, who is there, sitting amongst the lions. Who, again, as I mentioned before, we see when those who made this law in order to trap Daniel are thrown in, they don't even touch the ground before they are devoured. These lions are hungry. These lions want to kill people. These are probably Assyrian lions who are an extinct species now, but were known for their aggression. Daniel does not waver, not once. That's where mostly, in chapter 6 is where the events of Daniel's life really ends. In chapter 7, you get you then move on to the visions that were for him and for the Jews. The visions beforehand were visions for Nebuchadnezzar and for the world more so, because that's why they're given to the most powerful man in the world. Then comes the visions that are for the Jews and for Daniel. Daniel is a devout Jew, as we've seen and shown. And so not once is his concern about Christianity. Christianity is not really a part of the visions of Daniel. I mean, the last three are about wars between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids in the Holy Land, aka in Jerusalem, in Israel. They're nothing about Christianity or Jesus. Now, Daniel does most likely get a vision from Jesus himself. At least it's highly considered that the man with I'm trying to remember where it is at the moment. In chapter 10, this being that gives Daniel these visions and interpretations is probably Jesus. That's with gold of topaz. I'm trying to remember. I'm flustering a little bit at the moment of where these things. There's so much in this book of history that it's hard to sometimes remember every little thing. But there's most likely it doesn't seem to be an angel. He has an encounter with an angel, it seems, later on with Gabriel. But at one point it seems to actually be Jesus. Because Revelations will then use that exact same language, again, found in Daniel, to refer to Jesus. And so that's how most go, it's probably Jesus himself who gave Daniel some of these visions. But these visions are about what will happen with the Jewish people. Because that's what Daniel cares about. He doesn't necessarily care about Christianity and us. No offense to us. He's a Jew. He cannot be a Christian. For Jesus has not come. He will die hundreds of years before Jesus will be born and die and resurrected. He's a Jew. And so his primary concern and the primary concerns of the book are for the Jews. Why this matters is because in these contexts, Revelations becomes a lot more clear, and I think to the correct interpretation of Revelations, that is about the Romans and not about the end of the world. Because when you look at the books of Ezekiel and Daniel, they're never talking about the end of the world. They don't talk about that. They don't even really talk about the Roman period too much, other than the the abomination of desolation. It is talking about the Jews, because that's what they care about. That's their centered focus. I mean, chapter 9 is an entire prayer that Daniel makes for his people. Daniel loves his people, and you see in chapter 9 his love for his people. He knows, like I said before, he knows that they have done wrong. He knows that they have been dishonorable. They have turned away from God, and yet he's asking in that chapter, he asks God to uphold his hand of the bargain, that the exile will only be for a certain period of time, that it will end. And he's asking, as the Persians are now in charge in the first year of Darius, that the exile now ends. And as I know I'm kind of out of time here, and I apologize, Daniel is a book we must study as Christians. Now, Daniel himself was an incredible human being, as Ezekiel exemplifies, but you got to parse out him a bit sometimes. He's not an easy guy to find in there, which is telling. Ezekiel's idea of himself was that he was just a conduit for God. He was just a good Jew who wanted to do what God willed for him. If there was anyone in the Bible who besides Jesus, of course, in the Old Testament, who personified not thy will, but thine be done, Daniel's one of the big ones. I think at times even the best. Like even Moses got mad, and we never see that from Daniel. We see he is constantly a servant of God. Moses made a mistake. Daniel doesn't seem to. I'm sure he actually did. He's still a human. But Daniel is a wonderful human being, and we must always, as Christians, I know a lot of you found this probably a bit dull and a bit boring, but it is important. There's a reason why Daniel is so heavily referenced in the New Testament. Like I said, 81 times for just one verse, and in the first 4 books. And there's plenty throughout the New Testament. Again, Revelations, it's the most quoted book. In the book of Revelations, the most quoted book is Daniel. Again, Daniel is an important book, one we must study and know. And so I hope that I've given you a little glimpse into it. This was an overview. Hopefully there's some things in there to catch your interest, to catch wait, really? I'm hoping. Because Daniel is a very, very interesting book. I know the history can be boring for a lot of people. I get that. I think my sister back there is a little bit like, Matt, that was heavy. I agree. Sorry, Shalise. But it is important because the historical referencing of Daniel is so important that even atheist, non-Christian historians of the Hellenistic period use Daniel as a source. The Hellenistic Age podcast, I can't remember who it's done by, but in the several of the wars in which the Seleucids and the Ptolemies are fighting in the Holy Land, he literally will start the podcast with several verses from Daniel, because it's so spot on in chapter 11. It's hard to parse through at times, but it is wonderful to see that God knew what was to happen and shows that he knows what was going to happen. I implore you as Christians to look into the book of Daniel. Look into who Daniel was. A man so honored that he is compared to Job. I don't think any of us could probably be compared to Job. No offense to us. I know I sure can't. I'm not that level at all. Daniel was. He's a man to be respected, and we should. His book is interesting and prophesies about the New Testament and the New Testament references to it. And as we leave here today, I hope you find some interest and some things that are neat to that you wish to dive more into about the book of Daniel. And as we close up and as we sing, let's remember that there is no book of the Bible that is not of edification. Thank you.